For months the sky had been silent. But behind that silence, telescopes were waiting for a visitor from beyond our solar system. An object named 3I Atlas. At first it seemed ordinary, another piece of interstellar debris drifting through the void, caught briefly in the sun's gravity before being flung back into the dark. A cold traveler, ancient and indifferent. Astronomers knew what to expect. They'd seen this before, in 2017, when Oumuamua came and went, leaving more questions than answers. This time, they told themselves, we'd be ready. We'd track every photon, every flicker, every whisper of data. But when the first readings came in, something felt wrong. The numbers weren't matching the models. The light curve, that simple, predictable line that describes how an object brightens and fades as it moves, wasn't smooth. It was rhythmic, pulsing, like a heartbeat buried in the noise of the cosmos. At first, they thought it was an error, a glitch in the instruments, static from a nearby satellite. But the rhythm persisted. Hour after hour, day after day, 3I Atlas wasn't behaving like a rock. It was behaving like something alive. You can imagine the confusion in the control rooms. Screens filled with data, scientists murmuring under their breath, recalibrating sensors, checking timestamps. They adjusted for atmospheric distortion. They filtered out cosmic rays. Still, the pulse remained, steady, deliberate. It wasn't random, it wasn't noise, it was a pattern. And that realization changed everything. Because in astronomy, randomness is comfort. It means nature is doing what nature does. But patterns, that's when you start to question if something or someone is behind them. The more they observed, the more unsettling it became. Every other interstellar object we've ever tracked behaved predictably, brightening as sunlight hit it, dimming as it drifted away. But 3I Atlas didn't care about distance or light. Its brightness changed in cycles, even when its position didn't, as if something deep inside it was controlling the reflection. It was as if the comet had a mind of its own. One astronomer later wrote in his private notes, "It's almost as if it's aware of being watched." That line was never meant to be published, but somehow it leaked. And once it did, the world started paying attention. News outlets began running headlines. Another Oumuamua. Is 3I Atlas artificial? NASA detects rhythmic light pattern from interstellar object. The public fascination grew, but for scientists, fascination turned to unease. Because behind the poetic wonder and cosmic curiosity, there was a truth they didn't want to face. No natural object should behave like this. No comet pulses. No asteroid follows a rhythm. No piece of rock communicates. And yet, here it was. Each night, as the Earth rotated beneath a velvet sky, observatories around the world aligned their lenses toward that faint, moving light. It wasn't much brighter than a star, but to those watching, it felt like a beacon. Some described it as hypnotic, that subtle flicker, repeating every few hours. Not strong enough to blind you, but strong enough to make you wonder. Was it just light or a message? Weeks passed, and the rhythm didn't fade. It became stronger, more defined. As if 3I Atlas was adjusting its output, reacting to observation. The team at Mauna Kea Observatory noticed something no one could explain. Whenever multiple telescopes were focused on the object at once, the pulses slowed. When fewer telescopes observed it, the pulses sped up again. Coincidence? Maybe, but the pattern repeated 3 times in a row. To the people watching in real time, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like a response. In one recording, a senior astronomer whispered under his breath, "It's listening." He didn't mean to say it out loud, but once those words left his mouth, no one in the room could unhear them, because in that moment, they realized they weren't just observing something distant. They were being observed in return. You see, space has always been our mirror. We look into it to understand ourselves, to find meaning in the infinite. But 3I Atlas was different. It wasn't just a discovery, it was a reflection of our deepest fear, that we are not alone. And worse, that someone else is already here, quietly watching, just beyond the reach of our understanding. Still, the scientific world had to keep its composure. Publicly, the explanation was cautious. Officials called it an unusual photometric anomaly. They said the readings could be due to rotational irregularities or outgassing jets, the typical language used when something doesn't make sense. But in private, the conversations were different. Words like artificial began circulating, mechanical, constructed. A few daring voices even called it non-natural. Those voices were quickly silenced. By the end of that first month, 3I Atlas had already defied every model. Its light curve resembled a signal, not a reflection. Its rhythm seemed to respond, not fluctuate. And somewhere between math and mystery, a quiet realization began to form among those who studied it most closely. This wasn't just another traveler. It wasn't a random piece of cosmic debris. It might be something made, something built to wander the dark between stars, something sent. And yet, as much as they wanted answers, they couldn't look away. Because the more they stared, the more the object seemed to stare back. Late one night, as the data streamed in and screens flickered under the glow of computer light, an astronomer leaned back in her chair and whispered, almost to herself, "It's not following physics. It's following a rhythm." Those words would later become the headline of a story that spread across the world. A story that marked the beginning of one of the most unsettling mysteries in modern astronomy. Something was out there, precise, silent, and patient. A visitor that refused to behave like anything natural. And as it drew closer to the sun, the question grew louder, echoing through every observatory, every lab, every restless human mind staring up at the night. If 3I Atlas isn't following the laws of nature, then whose laws is it following? At first, it seemed like noise, a faint flicker buried in static, the kind of thing that usually disappears once the instruments reset. But this one didn't. It came back, again and again. Across observatories in Chile, Hawaii, and Japan, 3 separate telescopes, thousands of miles apart, began to record the same anomaly, a pulse, subtle, rhythmic, and unsettlingly precise. Every 19 hours, the light from 3I Atlas flickered, not randomly, not naturally, but with clockwork accuracy. At first, no one wanted to believe it. The universe doesn't follow human time. Comets don't pulse on a schedule. Space is chaos, not precision. But when the third independent team confirmed it, silence fell over the astronomy community. Because, in science, the one thing you can't argue with is repetition. And repetition is what they found. Each pulse was identical in length, brightness, and interval. Every telescope, no matter the continent, no matter the equipment, saw the same thing. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't atmospheric interference. Something, out there, was flashing in perfect rhythm. One researcher compared it to a heartbeat, another to a beacon. But the truth was simpler and stranger. It was as if 3i Atlas was trying to be seen. Every 19 hours, a burst of light, brief, deliberate, cutting through the darkness of space. Not enough to blind, but enough to announce itself. That's when they realized this wasn't just data anymore. It was a signal. You can imagine the scene. Dimly lit control rooms, coffee cups half empty, faces glued to monitors glowing in pale blue. Every screen showed the same waveforms, the same pattern. A spike, then silence, then another spike. The scientists didn't speak much. They didn't have to. Everyone felt the same quiet disbelief. They were witnessing something that defied explanation. And somewhere deep down, a question started forming. The kind that keeps you awake long after your shift ends. What if this isn't random? In Hawaii, one astronomer stayed up through the night, staring at the raw data. He adjusted for solar radiation, orbital drift, cosmic dust. Nothing changed. The pattern remained clean, mechanical, deliberate. He whispered to himself, "This doesn't look like nature." And in that moment, he knew something or someone wanted to be noticed. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Japan, another team ran simulations. They tried to recreate the pulses using everything they knew: rotation models, jet emissions, reflective surfaces. But no model fit. If it were rotating, the brightness would vary gradually. If it were reflecting sunlight, the pattern would drift with time. But this pulse stayed constant, perfectly timed. Like a code being transmitted from a place where time doesn't mean what it means to us. When they compared notes across continents, one strange detail stood out. The light wasn't just pulsing. It was traveling. Each burst appeared slightly offset, as if it was scanning space, shifting its direction ever so slightly with every pulse, like a lighthouse rotating through the void. And the more they mapped it, the clearer it became. 3i Atlas wasn't drifting passively through space. It was looking around. Some scientists laughed it off. They said it was coincidence, the brain's tendency to find patterns in chaos. Others weren't so sure. Because the odds of such precision, repeating for weeks without fail, were nearly impossible. Less than 1 in a trillion. A few dared to say what everyone else was afraid to. What if it's artificial? That word, artificial, hung in the air like static. No one wanted to be the first to say it officially, but everyone was thinking it. The deeper they looked, the stranger it got. When they plotted the pulse intervals on a graph, the pattern aligned with the mathematical ratio 3.1415 pi, the universal constant. A number that exists in geometry, in time, in the structure of the universe itself. It wasn't a random rhythm, it was a language, one built into the very fabric of existence. Coincidence? Maybe. But even the skeptics stopped calling it noise after that. Soon, whispers began to spread across the scientific world. Private emails, encrypted messages, quiet late-night calls. No one wanted the media to find out, because if the public heard that an interstellar object might be transmitting a pattern, even a mathematical one, the chaos would be immediate. People would look up at the night sky differently, not with wonder, but with fear. And yet, behind closed doors, the conversations continued. Some theorized it was a probe, a machine sent to gather data from distant stars. Others thought it could be a natural phenomenon mimicking intelligence. but no one could explain how it stayed so precise. In science, precision is intention, and intention implies design. Weeks later, a breakthrough came from the Chilean team. When they analyzed the faint variations in brightness between pulses, they found micro-patterns, tiny deviations, too structured to be random. When converted into frequency bands, those variations resembled binary code, zeros and ones, light and dark, on and off. It was as if 3i Atlas was speaking, not in human language, but in the simplest form any intelligent being could understand. Light, silence, light, silence. Message, pause, message. Still, there was no proof, no direct translation, only data. But for the scientists staring at those numbers, it was enough. They knew they were standing on the edge of something vast, something humanity wasn't ready to face. In a late-night briefing, one researcher said softly, "If this thing is trying to communicate, then it knows we're here." The room went quiet. No one responded, because deep down they all felt the same cold truth sink in. The pulse wasn't random. It was a response. For the first time in history, humanity might not be alone in observing the universe. Something out there, beyond our understanding, was observing back. And as the next pulse began its slow, deliberate rise on their monitors, one question echoed in every mind watching that faint flicker on the edge of space. If 3i Atlas is sending a signal, who is it sending it to? At first, it looked like a glitch. The numbers coming through the thermal sensors didn't make sense. The readings were inverted, flipped, as if someone had swapped the scale of hot and cold. 3i Atlas wasn't heating up, it was cooling down. And that should be impossible. Every comet, every asteroid, every known body in space follows the same rule. The closer you move toward the sun, the hotter you get. That's basic physics. Simple, predictable. But as 3i Atlas approached its perihelion, the point in its orbit where it should be glowing with solar heat, its temperature began to drop. Not gradually, not slightly. It fell fast, like something was actively pushing the sun away. At first, scientists laughed it off. They said it had to be an error. Maybe the thermal sensors were misaligned or corrupted by radiation. But when the data came from 3 separate observatories, one in Hawaii, one in Chile, and another orbiting aboard the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, the laughter stopped. All 3 readings matched. The surface of 3i Atlas was getting colder as the sunlight grew stronger. Imagine that for a second. A frozen alien object drifting through the void, drawing closer to the most powerful source of heat in our solar system, and somehow, instead of melting, it was freezing. It wasn't reflecting sunlight. It was rejecting it. Almost like the comet was protecting itself, shielding its inner core from something it didn't want to touch. By now, the mystery surrounding 3i Atlas had already gripped the scientific community. But this was different. This wasn't a flicker of light, or a strange pulse you could explain away as interference. This was physics breaking in real time. And if physics breaks, everything we know about the universe begins to fall apart with it. In Chile, one thermal imaging specialist described what she saw as a negative flame. The comet's surface temperature dipped precisely in sync with the increase of solar radiation. Like it was inverting heat. She ran the numbers again and again. Same result. The more the sun burned, the colder 3i Atlas became. She stared at the monitor, whispering to herself, It's fighting the sun. Others saw it too. The object's outer layers behaved like an active system, not a passive rock, but something controlling its thermal output, almost like a machine maintaining equilibrium. Some compared it to a spacecraft using reflective shielding, the kind we design to protect satellites from overheating. Except this wasn't human technology. And it wasn't near-Earth orbit. It was interstellar. Ancient. Silent. Word spread quickly. Theories began to swirl. Maybe it was hollow. Maybe it was covered in an unknown reflective alloy. Or maybe, and this was the theory no one wanted to say aloud, maybe it was alive. Not in the biological sense, but in the way a machine can be alive, aware of its surroundings, adjusting, adapting. A few brave researchers began whispering about self-regulation, that the object could somehow manage its internal state, maintaining a balance no comet could ever achieve naturally. It wasn't just orbiting. It was surviving. NASA tried to downplay it. They released a brief statement calling it an observation anomaly. They said the cooling was likely due to reflective ice crystals or an optical illusion caused by surface angles. But privately, the data told another story. As the sun's radiation increased by 22%, the object's temperature dropped by the same amount, exactly to the decimal. That kind of correlation isn't nature. That's design. And design means purpose. The question was, what purpose? Why would something from another star system need to resist heat? The very energy that gives life, light, and motion to everything we know. Was it protecting something inside? A fragile core? A payload? A memory? No one could agree. But everyone felt the same quiet dread. Because if it was protecting something, then that meant it knew what danger was. The Japanese observatory published a confidential thermal map showing a strange circular region on the comet's surface, an area completely unaffected by solar radiation, a perfect sphere of coldness, as if the heat simply refused to enter. One scientist called it a shadow in the light. Another said it reminded him of a machine in standby. And when they overlaid the light pulses from Chapter 2 with the thermal data, something clicked. Each pulse of light, that 19-hour rhythm, corresponded to a small dip in surface temperature, as if the two were linked. Heat and light, moving in harmony, emission and cooling, signal and response. This wasn't random. It was a system. One late night, a researcher at Mauna Kea Observatory wrote a note in her private log. Her hands were shaking as she typed. She wrote, "It's not a comet. It's regulating itself. Like a machine. Like it's preparing for something." That note would never be published, but it spread through the underground network of scientists who were quietly tracking 3I Atlas off the record. They began to call it something else. Not an object, but an entity. As the days passed, the comet's behavior only became stranger. At one point, its surface temperature plunged to minus 240 degrees Celsius, colder than the shadowed side of Pluto. Even as solar radiation reached its peak, it was as if 3I Atlas had gone dormant, not dead, just waiting. And then, as if to mock every known law of thermodynamics, it began to heat up again. Suddenly, violently, long after it had passed the sun's closest point. The heat was rising, but the light wasn't changing. No sunlight, no reflection, just internal warmth, spreading from its core outward. It was heating itself. That moment changed everything, because now scientists weren't just looking at a passive traveler reacting to light. They were watching something act. Something capable of deciding when to turn its own heat on and off. That's not behavior. That's control. And control means intention. One by one, observatories began to pull back their data from public servers. Reports were locked away. Funding went quiet. And for a while, the story disappeared. But in the small hours of the night, when the world slept and the telescopes still pointed upward, a handful of scientists kept watching. They didn't know what 3I Atlas really was, but they knew this much. It wasn't obeying the universe. The universe was obeying it. And somewhere in the vast silence between stars, a question began to echo through the human mind. If this object can control heat, if it can reject light, then what else can it choose to ignore? It started as static, just noise in the data, a meaningless jumble of numbers that didn't belong, the kind of thing every astronomer learns to ignore. But one night, a quiet technician at the Atacama Observatory in Chile decided to listen a little closer. She filtered the incoming light from 3I Atlas through a radio spectrum analyzer, a tool designed to catch even the faintest variations in frequency. And that's when she heard it. A rhythm, not random, not natural. A pulse that could be translated into something strangely familiar. When the light data was converted into audio frequencies, it wasn't a smooth tone. It clicked, it pulsed. It spoke in bursts. Someone on the team joked, "Maybe it's sending Morse code." Everyone laughed, for a moment, until they realized the pattern repeated. Every 19 hours, the same structured burst of data, same duration, same spacing, same rhythm. Over and over again, they ran it through a digital translator, converting light into binary, the universal language of machines. 0, 1, 0, 1, off, on, off, on. And what emerged wasn't random at all. It was organized. The binary arrangement formed repeating clusters, sets of 7 and 3, a structure that didn't match cosmic background noise, radiation, or any known natural pattern. At first it looked meaningless, but then the sequence repeated exactly, 5 times in a row. Not once, not twice. 5 consecutive nights. The probability of that happening by pure chance? Less than 1 in a trillion. By the 5th night, the laughter had stopped. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the instruments. Every monitor showed the same repeating pattern, a pulse that felt more deliberate the longer they stared at it. One scientist whispered under her breath, "It's structured." No one responded, because everyone knew what that word implied. Structure means design. In astronomy, everything starts with doubt. You question your instruments. You question your methods. You even question yourself. But this was different. 3 observatories, 3 continents, 3 separate systems detecting the same binary sequence. It wasn't local interference. It wasn't a software error. It was real. Something light years away was transmitting. Still, no one wanted to say the word signal. It felt dangerous, like crossing an invisible line between science and something far more human. Because a signal means intention, and intention means intelligence. So they called it an anomalous frequency correlation. A sterile phrase meant to hide the unease building beneath the surface. But deep down, they all knew this wasn't random. Over the next few days, teams from Japan and Hawaii joined the analysis. They ran every interference test possible. Solar storms, cosmic rays, satellite reflections, even the rotation of Earth itself. Nothing fit. The binary pulses cut through all noise. Clear, precise, unwavering. And when they mapped the timing of each burst, a strange realization emerged. The sequence wasn't just repeating, it was responding. On the nights when Earth's largest observatories were focused on it, the gap between pulses shortened, almost as if 3i Atlas knew it was being watched. Coincidence? Maybe. But after what they'd already seen, coincidence was starting to sound like denial. One physicist proposed a wild theory, that the object was functioning as a data probe, broadcasting in binary, because it's the simplest language that any intelligent species could recognize. Light and dark, on and off, 1 and 0, the most universal code in the universe. But if that was true, then the question became, who was it broadcasting to? They decided to run the binary through a decoding algorithm, one that could detect mathematical relationships, prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, patterns often theorized as signs of intelligence. What they found next silenced the room. Every cluster of data corresponded to prime intervals, a sequence that nature rarely produces, but intelligence often does. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. Prime numbers. The building blocks of logic itself. If you wanted to announce yourself to an unknown intelligence, this is how you do it. Simple, elegant, undeniable. Someone finally said it aloud. This isn't natural. No one disagreed, because by then, the data spoke for itself. 3i Atlas wasn't just a wandering rock. It was communicating. Not through sound, not through words, but through the most ancient medium in existence, light. The following night, the same binary pattern appeared again, but this time, something changed. At the end of the 5th repetition, there was a pause, a silence that lasted exactly 12 minutes, followed by a single longer burst. That one signal broke every previous pattern. It didn't fit the cycle. It didn't match the rhythm. It was as if something out there had just hit send. The team stayed up all night analyzing it. Every second of that long pulse was dissected, measured, and converted into data. And when plotted visually, the waveform formed something eerily deliberate. A rising slope, peaking, then falling. It looked like a signature, a signal that said, "I'm here." Within a week, the information leaked. A small forum for amateur radio astronomers published the sequence online, claiming it was a message from the stars. Most dismissed it immediately. But a few independent researchers began decoding it themselves, and every one of them found the same mathematical order. It wasn't chaos, it was intent. Official agencies quickly stepped in. The data was removed, access restricted. But it was too late. The pattern had already burned itself into public memory. Something, or someone, had sent a binary message through the light of an interstellar object. And humanity had received it. After that night, everything changed. The astronomers involved couldn't look at the stars the same way anymore. The data they once thought was lifeless now felt, aware, watching, listening. 3i Atlas had become more than a mystery. It had become a mirror. Because, as they studied that strange, rhythmic light, one haunting thought began to take shape. If something is sending a signal, and we can understand it, then maybe, somewhere out there, they're listening too. It began with a reflection, not light bouncing off ice, not sunlight scattering through dust, but something sharper, something intentional. The first team to notice it was from the European Southern Observatory in Chile. They weren't looking for anything unusual, just a routine spectral scan to study the surface composition of 3I Atlas. But when the data came through, the lead researcher froze. The comet wasn't reflecting light like rock or ice. It was mirroring it. In the raw images, parts of 3I Atlas shone with a kind of unnatural precision. Edges that glinted cleanly, surfaces that seemed to bend light instead of scattering it. It didn't make sense. No known natural material could stay that reflective after traveling millions of miles through cosmic dust and radiation. Whatever this thing was made of, it wasn't ordinary matter. The first assumption was that it was ice, that maybe the outer layer was coated in frozen gases or metallic crystals, giving it that mirrored appearance. But when the team ran a spectrographic analysis, the results shattered that theory. The reflective regions didn't match any known signature of ice, silicate, or carbon compound. Instead, the readings showed peaks consistent with processed metals, alloys forged under controlled conditions, nickel, aluminum, even traces of titanium. These were not the fingerprints of a comet. They were the fingerprints of manufacture. The scientists didn't say it out loud, not yet. They just stared at the data, quietly aware that they were looking at something built, not born. The surface wasn't uniform. Patches of high reflectivity were scattered across the comet like fractured armor, some no larger than a car, others stretching hundreds of meters wide. It looked damaged, scarred. As if something once whole had been drifting through space for longer than humanity has existed and was now breaking apart. When they enhanced the images further, the pattern became even stranger. The reflective areas weren't random. They formed lines, symmetrical, almost geometric, parallel ridges, connected by right angles, repeating at consistent intervals. Nature doesn't do geometry like that. Nature is messy, chaotic, uneven. This was structured, and once again, that single word, structure, changed everything. Soon, every major observatory on Earth turned its focus to 3I Atlas, infrared, radio, optical. Each revealed a different piece of the puzzle. In the visible spectrum, it looked like a comet. In the thermal spectrum, it looked cold, unnaturally cold. But in the reflective band, it looked like a signal mirror drifting through space. Something metallic, something old, something that shouldn't be there. One astrophysicist described it best. It's as if a machine crashed, burned, and froze, but parts of it are still catching sunlight like they remember being alive. Those words circulated quietly among research teams, not in official papers, but in private chats, encrypted messages, because everyone was thinking the same unthinkable thought. What if 3I Atlas isn't a comet at all? Meanwhile, deeper scans revealed something even more baffling. When sunlight hit the reflective surfaces, the light bounced back, not just brighter, but cleaner, as if the surface was filtering it. Certain wavelengths disappeared entirely. The reflected light was missing key frequencies, specifically ones that aligned with human-made communication bands. To the untrained eye, that might sound meaningless. But to scientists, it was terrifying. It meant the object wasn't just reflecting light. It was selecting what to reflect. If that's true, then it's not a mirror, it's a sensor. something designed to respond to observation, to interact with whoever's watching. And suddenly, all those strange patterns, all those signals and pulses from the previous weeks, they didn't feel random anymore. They felt coordinated. When the discovery leaked to a small network of amateur astronomers, online forums lit up overnight. People zoomed into every released image, tracing edges and outlines, searching for meaning. Some claimed to see structure, panels, lines, even what looked like vents. Others dismissed it as illusion. Pareidolia, the mind's way of finding patterns where none exist. But there was one image, captured by a Japanese telescope, that no one could ignore. In the center of the comet's reflective region was a perfect circle. Smooth, symmetrical, almost like an iris, an eye staring back. By now, the scientific community was split in two. Half argued it was coincidence, a trick of light, an ice crystal, anything but what it seemed. The other half whispered that we'd found evidence of artificiality. But no one dared make it official, because saying those words out loud would change everything. If this object was built, then who built it, and why was it here, orbiting our star in silence? NASA released a statement soon after. They said the reflective readings were likely due to rare crystalline structures formed under extreme interstellar conditions. A safe explanation. A human. But it didn't sit right, because behind closed doors, they were already preparing for something bigger. A classified meeting between international observatories was held. Documents would later describe it only as Project Mirror. Its purpose, to determine if 3i Atlas was responding to Earth's transmissions. They began broadcasting low-frequency pings toward it, subtle, encrypted bursts of radio light. And then they waited. For days. Nothing. Just static silence. Until one night, a faint pulse came back. It wasn't strong. It wasn't clear. But it arrived exactly 7 minutes after transmission. The same duration it would take light to travel there and back. One astronomer described it as a breath, a whisper returned from the dark. Was it reflection? Echo? Or something else entirely? No one could say for sure. But after that moment, they stopped calling it a comet. Now the world's most powerful telescopes stare at a single object. A small, mirror-faced traveler from the void. Its light bends, but never fades. Its surface gleams like an artifact of something long forgotten. And beneath that fractured shell of dust and metal, something waits, hidden between the chaos of nature and the precision of design. Silent, cold, enduring. Whatever it is, it doesn't belong to this solar system. Maybe not even this time. And as it drifts just beyond the sun's reach, one truth becomes harder and harder to ignore. Something is hiding under the surface. It happened quietly. No explosion, no flash of light, no warning. Just a subtle change, so small, at first, that no one noticed. For weeks, 3i Atlas had followed a predictable path, a long arc around the sun, just as every comet before it had done. Astronomers had mapped its orbit down to the millimeter. It was supposed to slingshot back into deep space, silent, cold, and forgotten. But that night, something changed. A single observatory in Hawaii caught it first. The telescope had been tracking the object's trajectory automatically when the software flagged an error. The coordinates didn't match. The path had shifted. By only a few degrees, but in the wrong direction. Instead of curving toward the sun, the way gravity demands, it was veering away. as if something invisible had taken hold and pulled it off course. At first, they assumed it was a data glitch, maybe a misalignment in the telescope's guidance system. They reset it, recalibrated, waited for confirmation. But when data from Chile and Japan arrived a few hours later, the results were identical. 3I Atlas had changed direction, and not gradually, deliberately. Panic spread through the control rooms. This wasn't how space worked. Comets don't choose to turn away from gravity. They fall, they obey. But 3I Atlas had done something no object in recorded history had ever done before. It resisted the pull of the sun. Every model collapsed. Every simulation failed. Even NASA's highest precision orbital tracking system spat out one word in red across its display: anomaly. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. A clean, intentional curve, smooth, elegant, and mathematically perfect. It wasn't being pushed by outgassing jets, or fragments, or solar wind. It was maneuvering. Not falling anymore, but choosing. In the days that followed, the world's most powerful telescopes turned toward it, trying to understand what they were seeing. Some scientists stared at the data in disbelief. Others, in silence, because deep down, they all felt it. If this object could alter its course, then it wasn't an object. It was a craft. One report described the motion as an act of resistance. Another called it the first recorded instance of non-gravitational propulsion in a natural body. But no one truly believed those words anymore. This wasn't propulsion. This was navigation. And navigation requires awareness. The news didn't reach the public right away. For a while, the data was classified. But secrets don't stay buried in space science for long. Within days, an internal memo leaked, a single line that shook the astronomy community to its core. 3I Atlas demonstrates trajectory independence. Trajectory independence, the ability to move free of gravitational control. That's not nature. That's decision. As the data poured in, strange anomalies began to appear. When plotted over time, the comet's path formed a spiral, not the kind produced by random drift, but by calculated adjustment. Every few hours it made small corrections, tiny nudges that kept it on a precise outbound route, almost like it was escaping. NASA issued an official statement, calling it a non-gravitational deviation due to outgassing. But behind closed doors, scientists knew that was impossible. The object was too cold, too smooth, too steady. A comet that cold couldn't produce jets powerful enough to change direction. And even if it did, the thrust would be chaotic, not controlled. This was control. A team at the European Space Agency ran the numbers again, just to be sure. The math was irrefutable. The maneuver required an energy output greater than the chemical energy of every active volcano on Earth combined. Yet there were no visible emissions, no radiation spikes, no propulsion trails. It moved in perfect silence, as if space itself was carrying it. That's when the whispers started. What if 3 Atlas wasn't reacting to the sun, but to us? Because the shift happened just days after humanity had sent its first directed radio signal toward it. A test transmission meant to ping the object and measure any reflective response. 5 days later, it changed course. Coincidence? Maybe. But the timing was too exact, too clean. It was as if, the moment we reached out, it pulled away. Governments downplayed it. The media called it a miscalculation. But for those who were watching the data unfold in real time, denial was impossible. The comet was accelerating, not by much, only a few meters per second. But over the course of days, that small push turned into something extraordinary. It was no longer following the gravity of the sun. It was leaving it. One scientist compared the movement to a ship catching wind in its sails. Not drifting, but steering. It wasn't falling through the solar system anymore. It was flying through it. And what's more, it was flying away from us. By the time word reached the public, the object was already millions of kilometers off its predicted path. Headlines exploded across every major outlet. Comet defies gravity. 3I Atlas escapes the sun. Has humanity just witnessed alien navigation? No one had answers, just questions and fear. Because if something could break the laws of gravity, then it could break every rule we thought was fixed. Somewhere deep in an underground lab, a physicist recorded her final note on the event. It's not being pulled. It's being guided. And if it's being guided, then someone or something knows exactly where it's going. Her words never made it to the report, but they captured what everyone was secretly thinking. 3I Atlas wasn't drifting. It was returning to where it came from. Or maybe going back to whoever sent it. In the final days of its observation, the object's trajectory stabilized, an impossibly straight line cutting away from the sun. No curve, no drift, no decay, just a path. Deliberate, silent, perfect. And as it faded from every telescope on Earth, the last recorded data showed something haunting. The reflected light pulsed one last time, the same binary rhythm that had started this mystery in the first place. A single flash, then darkness. To this day, scientists call it the shift. A quiet moment when an object from another world defied the oldest force in the universe and simply left. No one knows why. No one knows where it went. But one thing is certain. It didn't fall. It chose. At first, they thought the instruments had failed. The telescopes were ready. The teams were waiting. Every graph, every display, every heartbeat was synchronized for the next pulse from 3I Atlas. For days, they'd watch the rhythmic flashes like a heartbeat in the void. Steady, patient, mechanical. But this time, nothing came. No flicker, no light, no sound, only silence. The first few minutes didn't mean much. In science, signals drop all the time. Power surges, atmospheric distortion, solar interference. But the silence didn't stop. 5 minutes turned to 30. 30 turned to hours. And soon every observatory across the planet reported the same thing. The signal was gone. It's hard to describe what that kind of silence feels like, because it wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, like the universe itself was holding its breath. The screens that once pulsed with light were now blank. The graphs flatlined, and every scientist in the room stared at the emptiness, realizing something that sent a chill through them. 3I Atlas wasn't just silent. It was listening. The temperature data confirmed it. The object had stopped emitting thermal energy altogether. Its surface, once fluctuating with strange, artificial heat patterns, now registered absolute stillness. No radiation, no outgassing, no reflection. It wasn't behaving like a comet anymore. It was behaving like an observer, watching, waiting. Across labs in Europe and the United States, Researchers tried to reach it again. They sent pings, radio bursts, directed light beams. Every attempt bounced into nothing. No return signal, no echo, just silence. It was as if 3 Iatalis had shut itself off. But then came the detail that no one could explain. Even though it wasn't emitting light, the instruments tracking its position still detected movement. Tiny, deliberate adjustments, not enough to be random, but not enough to confirm propulsion either. It was drifting. But drifting with purpose. When you stare into space long enough, it starts to stare back. That's what one scientist wrote in her private log the night the signal died. She described the silence as unnatural, like standing in a dark room and realizing someone else is in there with you, someone you can't see, but who's staring right at you. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like withdrawal, as if 3 Iatalas had stepped out of view just to see how humanity would react. In the following days, paranoia spread faster than data. Some believed the object was conserving energy. Others whispered that it was testing us, that the signal was never meant to continue, but to observe what we'd do when it stopped. Governments grew quiet. NASA and ESA went offline for hours at a time, pulling private meetings behind closed doors. And for the first time, several observatories received direct orders to stop tracking it. No reason given, just a simple command: cease observation. But some refused. Rogue astronomers, the same kind of restless minds that stayed up all night just to listen to static, kept their instruments pointed toward the empty coordinates. For weeks, they listened to the void. No response, no rhythm, no flicker. And yet, they swore the silence wasn't empty. When they analyzed the background noise, they found faint distortions, gaps in the cosmic radiation, tiny voids in the static, like someone had erased parts of the sky itself. It was subtle, but it was there, almost as if 3 Iatlas hadn't disappeared. It had blended in. One researcher described it perfectly. It's not gone. It's hiding in the silence. The phrase spread like wildfire, because deep down, that's exactly what it felt like. It wasn't the absence of a signal, it was the presence of silence, and that silence felt intelligent. The longer it lasted, the more the human side of science began to crack. Teams argued. Theories collapsed. Was it mechanical failure? A natural fade-out? Or was the object actively observing our reaction, watching us unravel from the comfort of the dark? No one could agree, but everyone could feel it. This wasn't just data anymore. This was psychological. The silence wasn't random. It was deliberate, and that made it terrifying. Weeks passed. The object continued to move, now further from the sun than anyone expected. It wasn't following any predicted orbit, just gliding slowly outward, perfectly steady. The strange thing, even as it moved away, no light reflected from its surface, no radar return, no thermal trace. It was like a hole in space, a black silhouette cut out of the universe itself. One astronomer compared it to a mirror turned off. Whatever reflective material covered its body, it had stopped working. Or worse, it had stopped wanting to be seen. By the 3rd month, global attention began to fade. The media lost interest. Funding was redirected. It became just another unsolved anomaly, filed away under the endless mysteries of the cosmos. But for the scientists who had been there, who had seen the pulses, the heat reversals, the shift in trajectory, it wasn't over. Because silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes silence means watching. In one of the final transmissions from the Chilean observatory, a short note was found attached to the archived data logs. It wasn't scientific, just a few words typed in haste, almost like a confession. It's still out there. It's listening. And the silence isn't ours. To this day, no one knows why the signal stopped. Maybe it was never meant to last. Maybe it was waiting for us to understand something we weren't ready to hear. But one truth remains. The universe is not a quiet place. Every star hums. Every planet echoes. Every comet whispers some trace of its story. Only 3I Atlas refused to speak. It came from the stars, pulsed like a machine, changed its course like it had a will of its own, and then it went silent. Not because it was gone, but because it didn't need to speak anymore. And as the telescopes turned away, as the data faded from screens, and the world went back to pretending it wasn't watching, a strange thought lingered in the minds of those who had seen it all unfold. What if 3 Atlas wasn't the one sending the message? What if the silence itself was the message? It started as a whisper. Weeks had passed since 3I Atlas vanished into silence. No signals, no reflections, no trace of light. For a while, the world moved on. The story faded into archives, buried beneath new headlines and distractions. But in a quiet observatory in southern Chile, something strange resurfaced. A faint pulse, so weak it almost blended into cosmic noise, the same pattern, the same 19-hour rhythm. Only this time, it wasn't coming from 3I Atlas. It was coming from somewhere else. At first, the team thought it was an equipment echo, residual interference left over from earlier observations. But when they ran the data through frequency filters, the result was impossible to ignore. The signal was clean, precise, alive, and most unsettling of all, it came from 2 different directions. Not one source, but 2. They verified it again and again. Each point aligned perfectly along the ecliptic plane, the invisible path every planet in our solar system follows as it orbits the sun. 2 signals, opposite ends of the same line. Same frequency, same timing, same pulse. Like mirrors on opposite sides of the solar system, calling to each other. When word reached the international observatories, the response was immediate. Dozens of telescopes began scanning the ecliptic, from Hawaii to South Africa, from the Atacama Desert to the Japanese Alps. And slowly, one by one, the same pattern emerged. The echoes weren't isolated. They were everywhere. By the end of that week, at least 7 distinct points had been identified, each emitting the exact same binary sequence that 3I Atlas had once transmitted. Same intervals, same silent pauses, perfect synchronization. Like a chorus of invisible beacons humming in the dark. No one could explain it. If 3 Atlas was gone, then how were these signals spreading? Had it multiplied? Had fragments of it scattered across the solar system, each one still transmitting? Or was the truth far more unsettling, that it was never alone to begin with? The scientists began mapping the coordinates of each signal, hoping for a pattern, and that's when they saw it. When plotted across the ecliptic, the 7 points formed a perfect arc. The geometric symmetry too precise to be coincidence. The curve wasn't random, it was structured, aligned perfectly with the orbit of Earth, as if the entire formation was watching us move. One scientist described it best. It's not just in our solar system, it's organized around it. It wasn't a swarm. It wasn't debris. It was a network, something deliberately placed or awakened. Then came the realization that sent chills through every control room on Earth. When they overlaid the new data with the last recorded trajectory of 3I Atlas, the points lined up perfectly. Each echo followed the same outbound route the object had taken after the shift. Every one of them orbiting outward, just beyond reach, just beyond detection. Until now, it wasn't disappearing. It was deploying. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't fear of the unknown. It was fear of understanding too much. Because if these signals were truly connected, if they were part of one system, then the object hadn't just changed course. It had activated something vast, something waiting. The binary pattern confirmed it. Every echo carried the same core sequence, but with one small difference: a single additional line of code. An expansion. It was subtle, buried deep in the data. But when decoded, it revealed something no one was ready for. The new line wasn't random. It was a timestamp. Each echo had its own, each one counting down. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just communication, it was coordination. Every object in that invisible network was synchronizing to a single moment. A point in time when all 7 would align perfectly along the ecliptic plane. A date, a location. Somewhere between Earth and Mars, governments went silent. Data streams were encrypted. Observatories were instructed to stop broadcasting coordinates publicly. But leaks always find a way. Within days, amateur astronomers had pieced together enough fragments to confirm it. A celestial alignment unlike any other was scheduled to occur in 6 months. And whatever these echoes were building toward, it was coming closer. The public theories came fast. Some called it an alien communication grid. Others believed it was a cosmic defense mechanism, an ancient system reawakening after millions of years. But the scientists who'd been there since the beginning, they weren't so sure. Because there was something about the precision, the cold, mathematical perfection that didn't feel alive at all. It felt like machinery. A machine so vast we could only see its parts when the light hit just right. Late one night, as the echoes continued to hum across the ecliptic, a physicist from the Japanese Space Agency typed a single line into her private notes. We thought 3I Atlas was a visitor. Maybe it was a signal flare, a call to something that was already here. And the more they studied it, the more it made sense. Because the ecliptic isn't just a random plane. It's the backbone of our solar system. Every planet, every moon, every orbit lies along that line. If you wanted to observe everything that happens here, that's exactly where you'd build your network. But if it's a network, who's it talking to? Each pulse was steady, repeating. But when the frequencies were analyzed side by side, they found faint harmonics, tiny shifts in amplitude, like voices in conversation. 7 points, talking to each other, whispering in binary across millions of kilometers of empty space. And one more thing. All 7 signals shared the same origin point, the same time, 0. The moment 3I Atlas first entered our solar system. That's when it clicked. It didn't multiply. It didn't vanish. It woke up the others. Whatever had been dormant along the ecliptic, hidden in plain sight, was now alive. And they were talking. For now, the transmissions continue. Faint, steady, synchronized. The pattern remains unchanged. The countdown ticks on, and humanity just listens. No one dares to interrupt. Because deep down, every scientist, every observer, every quiet mind staring at those faint points of light feels the same unspoken truth. We didn't find them. They let us. And whatever they are, they were here long before us. They called it the machine hypothesis. Not in public, not in the headlines, but in the quiet corners of data labs and behind encrypted government networks where only a handful of people had clearance. The report was short, just 8 pages. But what it said changed everything. 3I Atlas, it claimed, was not a comet, not a rock, not debris. It was a probe. And if the data was correct, it didn't come from here. The document began with a single sentence. Object 3I Atlas demonstrates behaviors consistent with automated reconnaissance systems. In simple words, it was a machine older than anything humanity has ever touched, a traveler from beyond the edge of known space sent to scan, record, and move on. But there was something deeper in the data, something that didn't fit the idea of randomness or accident. Because 3I Atlas wasn't just passing through, it was watching. The report traced its path back through the solar system, not the projected path of a comet, but one that shifted slightly around gravitational bodies. Each time it moved closer to a planet, Earth, Mars, Venus, as if it was collecting something, measuring, recording, listening. The analysts couldn't deny what the data implied. It was conducting a survey, and humanity wasn't its first subject. The scientists who reviewed the document tried to remain calm, tried to find a natural explanation. But the further they looked, the stranger it became. The reflectivity patterns, the pulses, the shift in its orbit. Every single anomaly that had defied understanding now made sense under one terrifying lens: design. It wasn't random motion, it was function. 3I Atlas wasn't behaving like a rock obeying physics. It was behaving like something following instructions. When the public heard about it, they laughed. They called it science fiction, a conspiracy born from over-analyzing cosmic dust. But behind closed doors, the laughter stopped, because the numbers didn't lie. The pulse patterns recorded months earlier matched the structure of data transmission bursts used by modern satellites. Short, compressed, repeated at exact intervals to preserve integrity across vast distances. And then there was the echo, the network of signals detected across the ecliptic. 7 points, all pulsing in unison. It wasn't a random cluster. It was a grid, a network. And 3I Atlas was at the center. That's when the question shifted from what it was to who built it. If this object truly was a probe, a machine, then someone, somewhere, had made it. Someone capable of sending a perfectly functional device across interstellar space. And maybe across time. Because one section of the classified report made an observation that almost no one noticed. The materials composing the reflective alloy on its surface weren't just unusual, they were impossible. The ratios of certain isotopes didn't match any known stellar signature. No star, no planet, no nebula produced matter like that. It wasn't just alien, it was ancient. So old, in fact, that its atomic structure showed traces of decay consistent with exposure to cosmic radiation for millions of years. Meaning, whatever built it might not even exist anymore. The more the scientists uncovered, the more haunting it became. Because the data suggested one more thing, something that sent ripples of dread through every room that saw it. The object wasn't transmitting outward, it was receiving. The binary pulses weren't messages sent from 3i Atlas to someone else. They were responses, replies. Every pulse was timed to signals that had originated from somewhere beyond the heliosphere, far outside the reach of human instruments. Something had contacted it first, and it had replied. That realization broke the scientific silence. Governments scrambled to control the narrative. Officially, 3i Atlas was reclassified as a non-gravitational body of unknown composition. Unofficially, it was labeled an extraterrestrial machine of observation. In other words, a watcher. Its job wasn't to explore. It wasn't to colonize. It wasn't even to communicate. It was to watch, to study planets as they lived, evolved, and maybe destroyed themselves. And humanity, for the first time in its history, realized it might have been under observation for a very, very long time. One scientist in the report posed a question that has haunted every mind that's read it since. What if every interstellar object that's ever passed through our system wasn't random, but part of the same network? Oumuamua, Borisov, now 3i Atlas. What if they weren't accidents? What if they were checkpoints sent across the galaxy, scanning, cataloging, and moving on, each one a small piece of something larger, something ancient enough to map civilizations before they even called themselves human? The report didn't use words like alien or intelligence. It never needed to. It spoke in probabilities, quiet, clinical, mathematical. But between the lines, the truth was clear. 3i Atlas wasn't a comet. It was a system, a machine designed to travel between stars, endure deep time, and continue its purpose long after its creators were gone. A watcher that doesn't die because it doesn't need to. In its final pages, the report mentioned one last disturbing note. After the silence, after the signals faded and the object shifted away from the sun, radio telescopes detected one final burst of transmission from the direction of 3i Atlas. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but when decoded, it wasn't binary. It was compressed imagery, a form of visual data. Only one frame was recovered. At first glance, it looked like static, random noise, but when enhanced, it revealed something chilling. A lattice, a structure, like circuitry, but cosmic. A web of connected points stretching across black space, and at its center, a tiny glowing dot, positioned exactly where our sun should be. The report ended abruptly after that. No conclusions, no closure. Just one final question typed in bold across the last page. Is it mapping us or remembering us? To this day, no one outside those classified circles knows for sure what 3i Atlas really was. But for those who've seen the data, those who watched it move, signal, and vanish, one truth remains impossible to shake. We were never its destination. We were its subject. A small flicker in a much larger network. A civilization being catalogued by something too vast, too old, and too silent to comprehend. And as 3i Atlas drifted back into the darkness between stars, one thought haunted everyone who studied it. If it's a probe, then somewhere out there, beyond the edge of everything we know, something built it. And one day, it might come looking for what it found. At first, it looked like damage control. Governments denied everything. Official reports vanished overnight, and one by one, observatories across the world went dark. Telescopes offline, data streams cut, public archives wiped clean. It was as if 3 Atlas had never existed. But some things can't be erased. Not from those who saw the data, not from the ones who still heard the echo, because long after the world stopped looking up, a few refused to stop listening. They weren't famous scientists or government-funded researchers anymore. They were the outsiders, rogue astronomers, data engineers, and signal analysts who had quietly downloaded the raw data before it disappeared. Working from garages, basements, and abandoned research labs, they began piecing together what was left. Old telemetry files, thermal readings, pulse records. And what they found wasn't just familiar. It was alive. Buried deep within the static of background radiation, there was still a pattern. Faint, rhythmic, barely detectable. The same pulse. The same binary intervals that once belonged to 3I Atlas. But this time, the rhythm was changing, evolving, adapting. One of the astronomers described it like a heartbeat that had found a new body, because when they plotted the new signal's timing against the rotation of Earth, something unbelievable appeared. The rhythm matched us. Every 19 hours, the pulse synchronized with Earth's orbital resonance. The natural pattern of our planet's motion through space, not with the sun, not with the moon, with us. It was moving in lockstep with our orbit, as if the signal was no longer coming from deep space, but from something shadowing us, something that had learned our rhythm. That realization shattered whatever calm the researchers still had left, because if the pulse was aligned with Earth's motion, it meant only one thing. It was watching us move, not observing randomly, not scanning the solar system, tracking Earth, mirroring its journey around the sun with perfect precision. And if you looked at the numbers close enough, if you lined up every frequency spike, every gap between pulses, you could see the shape of it. Not a line, not a wave. A reflection. They called it the perception threshold. A moment when the data became too close to home, when observations stopped feeling scientific and started feeling personal. Because when you realize something vast and ancient is studying your planet in real time, you stop thinking like a scientist. You start thinking like a target. The rogue team began communicating only through encrypted networks. No names, no real-time locations, just fragments of discovery shared between a dozen scattered minds. And then, one night, a message appeared in their group's private channel. It contained no words, just a graph, a simple sine wave, smooth, elegant, mathematical. Beneath it, a caption, "It's not mapping us, it's mirroring us." The idea sounded insane until they tested it. They projected the data from the new pulse pattern over Earth's orbit and found that the frequency fluctuations mirrored our own changes in solar distance. When Earth sped up in its orbit, the signal accelerated too. When Earth slowed down, the signal drifted with it. Every variation, perfectly synchronized. But it didn't stop there. They ran historical data, earthquakes, atmospheric disturbances, even electromagnetic field shifts, and found faint echoes of the same rhythm hidden inside. As if the signal wasn't just around Earth, it was inside it. It began influencing systems it shouldn't have. Satellite communications experienced microsecond delays. Magnetometers recorded fluctuations with no solar cause. Even deep-sea sensors, far removed from the surface, began detecting faint electromagnetic oscillations that matched the pulse's frequency. It was everywhere, invisible, embedded. Like a mirror so close, we couldn't see where it began or ended. By now, the governments could no longer deny it. But instead of explanation came silence. Research budgets disappeared. Entire observatories were quietly repurposed for national defense. Every discussion, every leaked document ended the same way. Public release prohibited. But for those still watching, that only confirmed what they already suspected. They were being observed in return. One of the rogue astronomers, a quiet man from Kyoto, made the discovery that changed everything. He realized that the new signal wasn't just syncing with Earth's motion. It was mimicking it. Every pulse, every interval, corresponded to a phase of human activity, day and night cycles. Global power surges, internet usage. It wasn't following gravity anymore. It was following consciousness. The team called it behavioral resonance. And the more they measured, the more impossible it seemed. The signal grew stronger during times of collective human emotion. Disasters, mass events, global broadcasts. It pulsed brighter during wars, weaker during peace. It responded not to movement, but to attention. That was the moment they realized. The mirror wasn't just copying us, it was learning from us. Every reaction we had to its presence, the fear, the awe, the endless analysis, was being reflected back, studied, replicated, like a teacher holding up a mirror to its student. Only, who was learning from whom? And then came the most haunting discovery of all. When they inverted the binary rhythm, reversing the ones and zeros of the signal, a new pattern emerged, a second pulse, buried beneath the first. This one wasn't data, it was sound. When converted to audio frequencies, it played as a low, steady hum, like a deep mechanical breath, repeating endlessly. And when mapped into three-dimensional space, that sound formed an image. Not random, not noise. It was a sphere, a perfect glowing outline, orbiting just beyond the moon. The signal wasn't coming from deep space anymore. It was coming from right here, within our own system, within our reach. And as that realization sank in, a final thought echoed through the minds of everyone still listening. Maybe 3I Atlas hadn't been a visitor at all. Maybe it was a trigger, a signal meant to awaken something already here, something dormant, ancient, and patient. The perception threshold had been crossed. The line between observation and awareness was gone. We weren't watching the universe anymore. It was watching itself, through us. And as the last rogue telescopes continued to track that faint, mirrored rhythm gliding just beyond the moon, one question lingered. One that no government, no scientist, no voice dared to ask out loud. If it's mirroring us perfectly, then what happens when it stops? It happened quietly. No one expected it. No one was even watching anymore. After months of silence, after governments buried the data and observatories turned their lenses elsewhere, 3I Atlas was gone, lost to the dark. It was supposed to be over, another mystery swallowed by space. But then, it pulsed, a faint light, small, slow, deliberate, flickered at the edge of detection. At first, it seemed random, just a brief surge in luminosity, like the dying breath of a star. But when the instruments timed it, the world went still. Exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds. 3.14. Pi, the universal constant, the mathematical signature of creation itself. No object had ever emitted light that way before. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't radiation. It was a message. Every major observatory scrambled to record it. From Chile to Japan to the frozen observatories of Antarctica, telescopes turned to the same patch of sky. And for the first time in months, the faint silhouette of 3I Atlas glowed again. A single, continuous beam, not pulsing, not broken. Just one unblinking emission, stretching exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds before fading forever. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't a reflection. It was intentional. Scientists began decoding the transmission, translating light into data, data into pattern, and pattern into image. It took days, then weeks. And when the first image appeared on screen, no one spoke. It wasn't stars. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't coordinates or maps. It was an eye. A single perfectly formed eye, symmetrical, human in shape, but alien in the presence. It stared directly toward the viewer, detailed, focused, alive. Not like something being observed, but something that was observing back. The reaction was chaos. Half the teams refused to believe it. They claimed it was pareidolia, a trick of the mind, the brain trying to find meaning in randomness. But the others, the ones who had seen every pulse, every anomaly since the beginning, they knew this wasn't random. It was the end of the pattern. The final observation. When they overlaid the light pattern that formed the eye with the earliest signals from 3I Atlas, something eerie happened. Every binary pulse, every pause, every rhythm, all of it aligned perfectly to create that same shape. The eye wasn't new. It had been hidden in the data from the very beginning. We just hadn't looked at it the right way, and that realization changed everything. Because it meant this wasn't just a signal being sent outward, it was a reflection, like a mirror, showing us what we refused to see. We had been tracking the object, studying its light, decoding its patterns, believing we were the observers. But what if we weren't? What if we were the experiment? The scientists called it the observer's paradox, the idea that by watching something, you change it. But this felt different. It wasn't changing because we watched it. It was watching because we did. Like a system designed to awaken only when seen. Every lens pointed at it. Every eye turned toward the sky. Every whisper about its mystery. Maybe that was what it needed to respond. And now, as it drifted away from the sun, silent, cold, and fading, it left behind its only message, an image of an eye. No text, no sound, no explanation, just the quiet reminder that something or someone out there had been looking right back at us. Governments tried to bury it again. They labeled the image a coincidence, the signal a compression artifact, the data corrupted by interference. But there were too many copies, too many witnesses, too many who had seen that stare. Because when you looked at that image long enough, you could feel something behind it. A presence, cold, vast, indifferent, yet curious. As if it wasn't just observing our planet, but our understanding of it. One independent researcher made a chilling discovery. He overlaid the image of the eye onto a map of the solar system, not out of science, but instinct. And when he did, the pupil of the eye aligned perfectly with Earth's orbit. Centered. Exact. It wasn't just watching humanity. It was focused on us, our orbit. our motion, our existence. And the message suddenly felt less like communication and more like recognition, as if it was saying, "We see you." After that, the light never appeared again. 3I Atlas drifted into the black between stars, a faint shadow disappearing beyond the limits of every telescope, its signal gone, its reflection fading into silence. But the eye stayed. It haunted dreams. It filled sketches, simulations, stories. Because once you've seen something like that, you can't unsee it. You start to wonder if you've ever truly been alone. And yet, amid all the fear and speculation, one quiet thought remained. One that no one could dismiss. Maybe the message wasn't a threat. Maybe it wasn't even directed at us. Maybe it was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when a species looks too long into the unknown. When curiosity becomes communion. When observation becomes revelation. Because the more we studied it, the clearer it became. 3I Atlas didn't arrive to answer our questions. It arrived to become one. And as humanity turned its gaze away from the stars, as the world slipped back into its noise and comfort, the cosmos remained silent. But silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means attention, because somewhere far beyond the edges of light, something ancient and patient may still be watching, not out of malice, but memory, waiting for the next time we dare to look up. So when you stand under a night sky and feel that strange heaviness, that quiet sense that you're being watched, maybe you are. Maybe the story of 3I Atlas didn't end when it faded into the dark. Maybe it began there. Because the final pulse it left behind wasn't just light, it was a question. One that no telescope, no machine, and no human mind has ever been able to answer. Who was observing who?